So I've done a ton of acoustic singer-songwriter type gigs over the years. These have ranged from simple open mic nights to booked acoustic gigs at bars to people's wedding ceremonies. And the thing that you're always searching for when it's just you on your onesie with only your acoustic guitar providing the full instrumentation is a fuller guitar sound. And not necessarily louder or beefier in tone, just less weak and clearly lacking in other instruments. So how do we make our acoustic guitar feel less vulnerable when there's no bass, drums or piano backing us up? Well, here's 5 things that I do. Most of our regular guitar chords don't actually grasp their full potential and make use of all 6 strings. If you look at our A chord, you can see that it omits the low E string. B chord also leaves out the low E string. C, no low E string. D leaves out 2 strings, the big E and the big A. E, well, E does play all 6 strings, fair play E. F, similar to D, only plays 4 strings. And G, well done G, you play all the strings. So that's only E and G that make use of all 6 strings on a guitar. That means that most of the time we're only using around 80%, maybe 60% of the guitar's potential. Please don't check me on those maths. Let's take our C major chord, which uses only 5 strings. It's okay, bit weak. But above, on this big heifer, is a low G, which is the 5th note in a C chord. So adding this on makes this a C over G, or just a C inversion, and makes a really full sound. And we can do the same with an A minor by choosing to add a low E. Now this works even better if played on alternate bars. And then our F by moving our ring finger up 1, placing the pinky back on and covering the low F bass note with our thumb. The point is we can try this on most of our chords. It might not work on all of them and shouldn't be used all the time, but if we can squeeze in the odd low string bass note, it'll make our solo guitar sound fuller. So in second place to the low E string in searching for a fuller sound isn't actually the next thickest A string. It's a combination of any open strings. You see, open strings ring fuller and sustain for longer. It's why our G chord and E chord sound so rich and full of depth. Because they have lots of open strings. So if you're playing in the key of E, and A works well for this too, using any chord that could be barred within that key. So E, A, B, C sharp minor, F sharp minor. Try moving that E shape along, keeping the top 2 strings open, the E and B, and using your thumb to cover the bass note. So an A would sound like this. Now if we listen to these chords, now this works because these 2 strings, the B and the E, are played consistently throughout, like a pedal note, which helps to sustain and really let those chords ring out. It also helps us to link chords together more smoothly without those little micro stops that we'll talk more about in the next point. If you're familiar with the caged system, and if not, I'll link a video up here that explains it in full, you'll know that there are some chords that you can slide along the fretboard to create different chords. This slide technique can be used to make chord changes much smoother and less jerky. So let's say we're changing from C to D to E minor. Now, many of us, and this is poor practice, leave these little micro pauses or dead moments between chord changes. Now, if I were to play this really slowly, because I can't remember how to put the camera in slow motion, you'll hopefully see what I mean. You see, in between each chord change, I'm lifting all my fingers up, and there's a moment of dead nothing. Nothing's really being played other than open strings. Now, in an ideal world, we want to practice and work to remove those little dead spots or micro pauses. The reality is, when we're playing live in a band situation, no one will ever notice. You've got a bass guitar, a drum, an electric guitar, a piano, backing singers that cover up all of those little gaps. Let me try and illustrate this for you. So whether this will make any sense at all, imagine we're strumming a C nice and smooth, and then there's these little micro, just dead spots where the chords don't really mean anything. What we want to try and aim for is a much smoother arc between chords where the changes are barely noticeable. So let's briefly touch on that caged system again. Without going into a huge amount of detail, cage stands for C, A, G, E, D, and those are the shapes that we can move along. Let's take our C from earlier, and we're going to move this up to a D by simply sliding every finger position up 2 frets, or one whole step, making a sort of D sus2, and then another whole step with a slightly different shape that makes an E minor sus something or other. So this technique really smooths out the changes. Now, this isn't going to work for every chord change, and indeed shouldn't be used for every chord change, but just sprinkled in every now and then to smooth out those transitions between chords and add some variation to your playing. So what do I mean by think like a bass player? A couple of things. One, a bass player will often throw in link notes between root chords. So let's say we have the chord progression G, C, D, E minor. So a bassist might add in these extra notes to link the chords and fill the gaps. He or she might go G, A, C, and then maybe a high D, D, and then the E, and then perhaps a C in between. Back to the G. So to beef up our acoustic sound and linger less, we could either throw in those bass notes as single notes or play the actual chords, incorporating the slide technique we've just learned. Other end of the sonic spectrum, and this may be perhaps more of a lead guitarist thing, but let's just stick with the bass guitar analogy for now, as I think it still holds up. Another thing a bass player might do on a build-up held on just one chord, or something that I might do if I'm playing bass, is pedal the octave halfway up the build. So let's say it's a build-up on a G, and that G is being held for a couple of bars before falling onto a bridge in E minor. A bassist will slide up on the octave halfway through, so like this. When only using your acoustic guitar, we can do something similar by again making use of that caged system. Focusing only on the top 4 strings, I might slide that G up to the A position before carrying on to a D-shaped G on the 7th fret. So it could sound like this. Or just going to the A and back to the G works in a similar way. Think of these like bass guitar fills that add some tension or flourish to solo acoustic playing. So we've just covered our bass player's contribution. The next item on our quest for a fuller guitar sound would be to add some percussive elements. And by this, I don't necessarily mean drumming on your guitar, which if you can do, great. I can't. I mean thinking like a drummer to bring in some dynamics to our performance. It's often said that to make a chorus sound big, you should make a verse sound small. And in a full band production, we'd usually achieve this by introducing or removing different instruments, or at least what those instruments are doing as a song develops. And the drummer, of course, plays a big part in this. Let's take the recognizable chord progression, A minor, C, E minor, D. A drummer might only play a hi-hat during a verse to keep the song quiet and underdeveloped. The acoustic guitar equivalent to this might be single note picking. Or finger picking. In a pre-chorus, our drummer might introduce a bass drum and snare, but in a controlled, not yet full gas way. Our acoustic equivalent might be to now play full chords, but with some palm muting to add a percussive element. Chorus, the drums are going for it full send. An acoustic equivalent is full strummed bar chords with lots of rhythm. So you're now fully equipped to go and smash that open mic night like a pro. If something here helped you today, please consider gently tapping that like button and letting me know in the comments. It really does mean a lot. Please also consider subscribing. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.